Okay, boys, Florida and Vegas. One of these two teams is going to win the Stanley Cup for the first time. One of these two coaches is going to win the Stanley Cup for the first time. And both team and coach have been to a Stanley Cup final before. So this is another chance for them. Let's start in Jesse's backyard. Golden Knights. What are you looking for going into this series? Is there a storyline that really intrigues you? A storyline that really is at top of mind for you?
I mean, in terms of storyline, it's Jack Eichel. I mean, this guy, what a change in narrative for the career arc of Jack Eichel. Like, he's 8 years into his career. He's not like a rookie or a second or third year guy. And he's getting to play his first playoffs. And this guy has been so good for his entire career, but yet has had to deal with you can't win with a guy like that. Like, yeah, he scores a lot of goals, but he has never won a playoff game. He's never been to the playoffs. So many unfair criticisms to Jack Eichel. He comes to Vegas. They have all these injuries. They missed the playoffs in his first year. And of course it gets lumped onto him. See what happens? You trade for Jack Eichel. He finally is on a talented team. He gets to the playoffs, his first ever playoffs. Everyone talks about how different the game is in the playoffs and how you've got to adjust to it. He's been brilliant, just spectacular for this team. He didn't score a goal against Dallas, and he was probably the best player on the ice every night. He is back checking better than any player on the ice. His defensive game is so good. The way he transports the puck from defensive zone to offensive zone is better than anyone I've seen in these playoffs. He's brilliant. And the fact that to me, the storyline is, how does he play in this cup final? It's going to be a tough matchup. It's supposed to get harder as it goes on. It certainly will. But to me, in terms of the storylines, like if you're asking me like where this series is going to be won, I think it's in front of the Vegas net. If Florida can get there, they're probably going to win. If Vegas holds them out like they have everyone else, they're probably going to win. But in terms of storylines, it's all about Jack Eichel for me.
Yeah, Russo. that will be. I mean, that is Florida's MO, is getting to the net. I mean, Paul Maurice talks about it all the time. How Tkachuk has all the different things in his system, and then next thing you know, he's at the net. And Bennett's at the net, and that's the way that they play this game. They're a hard checking, grinding player. It is amazing, to Jesse's point, the change in narrative in Eichel. And I remember telling you guys when I was at the NHL, I think it was actually like our first or second show that I was on the Athletic Hockey Show on Wednesdays, where I was out at the NHL media out in Vegas, and I told Jesse, I'm like, the one player of all the players that totally changed my impression of him was how good it was to deal with Eichel. He was so cool to deal with. And I remember when the Wild were going after Eichel as well, there were so many times Marcus Foligno told me, this guy gets a bad rap. He's a great guy, great player. Don't believe all the crap that you hear about him. And clearly he's gone there and shows it. But this Florida team, if Bob is the Bob that we've seen, they're going to win the cup. If he's not, I think that Vegas has all the ability to win this thing. Vegas has impressed me throughout the playoffs in their ability to respond to bad losses. Edmonton beats them 5-1 in game 2. They go to Edmonton and win that first game. Huge response. They lose game 4 and they come home, have a big win, and then go win game 6. And the same thing. It looks like Vegas is melting down, lose 2 games in a row with Jamie Benn, by the way, not in the lineup. How strange is that? And next thing you know, you're thinking like, oh my God, they're going to absolutely choke the series away. And what do? They go out and spank them 6-0 in game 6. This Vegas team, they're resilient, man. And if it were me, I know it was, if it were me, because I predicted it, I still think Vegas wins in 6. But this Florida team has defied odds all postseason long. Only second team in NHL history beyond Tampa Bay that has beaten 350 win, 110 point teams, and they to doubt them is do it at your own peril.
Are we at a point right now where Sergei Bobrovsky could win the Conn Smythe Trophy in a losing cause, Jesse?
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so. I mean, because if he loses in this, like, I don't think he's at a point where a bad series, like he'd have to be brilliant and lose. Like they'd have to lose every game that they lost 2-1, and he had 38 saves, 40 saves. Like, and I just don't think that's going to happen. The Golden Knights aren't a volume shooting team. The Golden Knights under Pete DeBoer were a volume shooting team. They'd put up 45 shots a game and maybe score twice. under Bruce Cassidy, they've played differently. They only get 25 shots a game and they score on 4 of them. So your stats are awful. Look at the goalies they've played. Like Connor Hellebuck in the first round, his stats were horrendous against the Golden Knights. Skinner, awful. You could argue whether he's an elite goalie or not, but awful. And then Jake Ottinger has the worst playoff series of his career up to this point. He's been brilliant in the playoffs. And I think it's because the Golden Knights, the way they attack is not with volume scoring. They only get a limited number of chances, but they're a 2-on-1 that's a one-timer on the back door, like that you can't stop. So I think Bobrovsky, if he's good, they're probably like Mike said, they're probably going to win the series and he'll probably win Conn Smythe. If he's not, if the Golden Knights win, I don't see a way that Bobrovsky looks good in the Conn Smythe.
And to Jesse's point, if the Golden Knights win, one of their contenders, whether it's Karlsson, Marchessault, or Eichel, are going to just erupt, I think.
Yeah.
And, I mean, to me, if you're going to pick a Vegas player, Eichel is by far the front runner. But man, William Karlsson, 10 goals for a checking center now. I mean, come on. And Marchessault, it's just that guy. He's long been one of my favorite players in the league. All he does is score, and I think he's one of those people that if you give him a little spur in the ass, he's motivated. And for him to play Florida right now, I think we're going to see the best of Jonathan Marchessault in the series.
Leave me unprotected, huh? Yeah. After I score 30 goals with you guys, well, I think I was going to bring up Marchessault. I think he's got the more motivation almost than any. And there's a few former players, but I mean, you look at him, like I said, 30 goals and you get left unprotected. You certainly want to get back at them for that, but we'll obviously break this down. It doesn't kick off till Saturday. But we're going to hear from Russo and his interview with Paul Maurice in a second, but I do want to get to a couple other things before we go, guys, because we have been seeing a little bit of musical chairs when it comes to coaches and GMs. And this one we had at the bottom of our page. Now we put it up to the top because according to Elliot Friedman, this is going to be wrapped up today and a media conference will be tomorrow. And that is that the Maple Leafs have found their man to be their new general manager, Brad Treliving. All signs point to him taking over the reins. Thoughts on this one, guys, and a GM who's, boy, does he ever have to hit the ground running, doesn't he, Russo?
Yeah, he's going to have you got the draft coming up, but he's got major contract negotiations that he's going to have to do in terms of extensions with Nylander and Austin Matthews. And then you got to decide on what the core is. I'm sure he's had that. Yeah. And my gut, I still think that Sheldon Keefe stays. I actually, I know that, and we'll get to it in a second, Barry Trotz is getting a lot of heat with the way that they treated John Hynes and everything. But the one thing I'll say is that I always find it hilarious that a GM comes in there and they stick with the coach for 1 year and inevitably that person is going to get fired. I think that is going to happen in Toronto, and I actually give Barry Trotz props. If he feels like that John Hynes is not the guy, just cut the cord now. Don't wait a year and waste it. So that would be my only thing there. But I think Keefe stays. But I'll tell you what, I just think that Treliving's the right hire. I know that everybody's, gonna look at the Kachuk Weaver trade and some of the moves he lives in Calgary. You need an experienced guy that has a level blood pressure in that position and that is used to the noise that you get in that market. And he experienced it a little bit in Calgary. Calgary's not Toronto, but it's still Canada. And so I think it's a great hire by Toronto. I think it was probably the only hire by Toronto. It was the obvious hire by Toronto once Dubas left. And now we'll see what happens there. But I think it's a good move by Toronto.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially with the last point about the experience. I don't think Toronto is a job for a GM to learn on the job. Like it's very difficult to come in as maybe an assistant GM or someone without experience and take that job, especially with the expectations it is right now. It may be different if the team wasn't talented and you were coming in for a rebuild, but the expectations on that team are for the new GM to immediately make changes that work and get this team deep into the playoffs. So there's a lot of pressure. Obviously, the market adds to that pressure. I think an experienced GM who's done this and knows how to handle those pressures. I mean, you hear Dubas towards the end, like it was even getting to him, and he'd been there for a while. So I think it's like, I agree with Michael. It's the right move. And I think it's the right move because they got someone who can come in and deal with those pressures immediately and still perform the job well.
All right. Russo mentioned it. The Nashville Predators making a move. Barry Trotz, who I'm not sure I think he's still considered the incoming GM, but this was his first move as a GM. And more people are talking about how this move came out than the actual move itself. Andrew Brunette hired as their new head coach, which means John Hynes was relieved of his duties as head coach. But the news didn't kind of break that way. We don't know when John Hynes was told he was fired, but it kind of came out backwards. I don't know, guys. Am I the only one who thinks 2023, how does this happen? How does this, shouldn't number one on your to-do list be at least let the coach know and put that out before you start hiring someone? Jesse?
I mean, we don't know that he didn't know, though, right? Yeah. It came out.
That's what I said. We don't know when he said it, but I'm saying, shouldn't that be then your first tweet, your first press release, your first everything should be, we have relieved John Hynes, and then Andrew Brunette gets hired.
I mean, I covered a team that literally did it in the same press conference. Not the same press conference, the same press release. I thought it was a fake press release. I had to zoom in on the email address and make sure it was actually from the Golden Knights and not somebody trying to punk me, because the press release said Gerard Gallant is no longer the coach and Pete DeBoer is now the new coach. I've never seen it in my life. So these things happen quickly. And as long as Hynes knew, I'm not really that concerned with the order we found out in. I'm concerned with the order that they found out in. If John Hynes found out Andrew Brunette's been hired as the coach before someone told him he's fired, that is bad. And it looks bad on Trotz. It looks bad on the whole organization. But as long as Hynes knew, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The only thing I'll say is that behind the scenes, my gut says that Barry, who is a classy person, was at least letting John know, look, I'm talking to people. And I will say that it started to come out in the last week that he was meeting with people. He met with Spencer, who's just hired in Washington. I know that he met with Andrew Brunette. They were doing this in Nashville, so my gut says that also, you're worried about people seeing you and things like that. And look, Barry did say at the press conference earlier this when he took over, that they were going to evaluate the coach. So, we got to, frankly, I'm going to try to reach out to John today and see if they'll talk about what happened. But in terms of Bruno, let me just transition to that. I love Bruno. I think everybody knows that. I covered him here forever, both as a player, as an assistant coach, as a player development guy, and as assistant GM. He is a great person. He has a certain mentality in terms of the way that he wants the game played. He is absolutely a player's coach. The players will love him there. He's got a hard job ahead of him. This is not Florida that was on the rise, that he wound up taking over and bringing him to a President's Cup. This is a team that's got a lot of work to do. They've got a lot of veterans, some tough contracts, a lot of kids, some inexperience. It's going to take a while. And as long as Barry Trotz, who remember was coach there forever, has that same mentality where he's going to work with a coach and let him grow in that position, I think this is a great hire. But they are going to have to give him time, and Barry's going to need time to turn this team into a quality.
And one other coaching change, Spencer Carbery has been named the new head coach of the Washington Capitals, signed him to a 4-year deal, spent some time in Toronto as the assistant coach there running their power play. And that was after Peter Laviolette got fired. This one seemed like one of the worst kept secrets. Not a big shocker here, right?
Yeah. And shocking getting a 4-year deal. Usually it's 3 years for a coach, especially your first job. But he just seemed to be sort of wherever, I know Anaheim talked to him, a bunch of teams talked to him. Same thing, Bruno, by the way. Bruno was making the rounds because I was just in Florida and Bruno was not in town. He was going, and he lives down there. He was doing the rounds of meeting with teams. But obviously, Brian McClellan loves this guy. Right down the road in Hershey, did a great job there, and we'll see what happens. And the other one, guys, that I'm interested in is Pittsburgh. What's going to happen with Kyle Dubas? Is he going there? Is he not? There's all sorts of conflicting reports. Is Edzo going with him? That's what I'm starting to hear. It'll be interesting.